Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Del Beccaro, and welcome to Politics in Perspective for a very cold end of the January. A lot to talk about, as always, this week. We're going to cover the midterms again, but from a slightly different angle. My opening statement will be about the Democrats, how they're actually the same party that lost the last election, but don't seem to want to make any changes and are expecting different results. But then again, the Republicans may need to worry about that as well. Today's difference maker is Rick Leventhal, now a host at Newsmax. We're going to talk about all things media, including the arrest of Don Lemon recently, and then we'll finish with our political roundup, talk about the Lemon arrest, and also an update of Iran with Annie Cyrus again, because Trump now has everything in place. So what's about to happen? We'll have to see. Let's first go to my opening statement. You know, everybody on the left is predicting a big Democrat victory. Of course, they do that every election. They talk about it. I mean, Carville said that Kamala Harris was going to win. Now he's saying that the Democrats are going to win in a blowout. Well, yes. What happens in midterms is that the party outside the White House tends to lose seats. Not as much as it used to, but that's the general trend. The problem for the Democrats is that they're the same party. So there's 3 points we want to cover. The fact that the Democrats are the same party, the fact that the Republicans are actually economically looking to be in a good place, and then what Trump needs to do. All of these are on my most recent Substack article. You should definitely join me on Substack, where I have a lot of these articles every week. So let's go to the first point about the Democrats and defunding ICE. What is defunding ICE? Well, think about it. Defunding ICE is defunding law enforcement, the police. That's been their position now for a number of years. Open borders, no immigration crackdown, not dating back to Obama, because he, of course, was the deporter in chief. Not dating back to Clinton. He, of course, deported a lot of people as well, and Hillary used to be in favor of that. But they're now all about open borders. And so defund ICE, their current anti-police enforcement mantra, is similar, and if not the same, as defund the police. So they haven't changed on that issue at all. Now let's go to Democrats and more spending. You recall last shutdown in October, the Democrats wanted 1.5 trillion in new spending. Well, how did we get into this problem? How did affordability become the issue? The answer is too much spending. And they haven't changed in that position at all. They want to get back into power. Schumer has said it twice this year already about how they want to refund all the programs that were cut. Very little was cut by the Trump administration, unfortunately, because the Republicans in Congress don't have the guts to do it. So the Democrats are in the same place as they always were on spending. So it's the same party that lost the 2024 election. Open borders, defund police, lots of spending, that causes inflation. They're the same party. Republicans, to a great degree, are the same party as well on the two big issues, the economy and the border. First, let's look at the economy. The Republicans passed the big, beautiful bill, which has extended tax reductions for tips, overtime now, and also for seniors and Social Security. So what is expected to happen this spring is a huge tax deduction for Americans, and it will hit at a great time because it will hit in the spring as the economy is picking up steam, and the consumers will enjoy this and their sentiments will be improved. So Republicans are on the right side of this issue. The Democrats are completely against this. Now, where does that leave us? Well, the Republicans also, of course, are the party that shut down the border, or President Trump did, really without doing very much. He just came in, and everybody on the bad side of this issue, cartels and those rushing the border, knew the game was up, and it shut down. If you look at the graph of the shutdown, it's really stunning how quickly this happened, because you have the high of Biden there on the left, and it's virtually flatlined to nothing at the bottom. So the Democrats are on the wrong side of this issue. They're wrong side of the spending issue. They're the wrong side of the taxing issue. And they're on the wrong side of spending as well. So the two parties are locked in the same position that decided the 2024 election. The difference is the Democrats are now more motivated because they're the party that lost the last election. And it's a midterms, and Republicans haven't proven they could get the vote out when Trump isn't on the ballot. So Trump plans differently. As I talk about in my Substack speech, we know that Trump is planning some sort of convention, and we've seen in the news that he's going around to states, but he needs to supplement that. For those of you who watched my this podcast a couple of weeks ago with John McLaughlin on, we talked about two other elements to that. We want to see a platform, not that the Republicans are running because we did great things. No, that's not going to be good enough. That's doing the same thing and expecting a different result. No, what they're adding to it this time around, or should, is a platform saying, elect us and we're going to do these 5 things. Now, keep in mind, this week the Republicans rolled out their big election bill to for citizenship and other requirements. The Democrats will be completely against that. They voted almost en masse against that. Even if Republicans put these bills up now just to see the Democrats reject them, that's a good idea, because what that does is put the Democrats on the record. That helped Bush 43 defeat Al Gore when the Republicans put up a tax cut and the Democrats rejected it, and that hurt them in the election. So they need to have this platform ready to go for this fall, and they need to push it. They did a weak attempt at it 4 years ago. They can't do a weak attempt at it this time around. Finally, what I'd like to personally see is Trump do town halls, not MAGA events. He can do those MAGA events, but he should do smaller town halls, really small town halls with independent voters listening. Trump's a great listener, and to talk to these people directly, hear what they have to say, and then talk about what he's doing. That format will not only be good to talking to independent voters, but it will create news. It is a newsworthy event. And so Trump should do that, because sometimes to get in the news, you have to make news. And that would be a great format for him. So here's the reality. The Republicans need to do something different because the Democrats are stuck with their bad issues. And that's what we should do, Republicans should do going forward. Now, the rest of my time in the opening statement, I want to talk about the Federal Reserve Chair, Kevin Warsh, the nominee, and why I was a proponent of his the whole time, hoping Trump would do this. I would have been happy with Scott Bessent, but Bessent's doing a great job at Treasury. Kevin Hassett's doing a great job going on TV and explaining things. Kevin Warsh is good for a number of reasons. He's highly qualified, formerly sat on the Federal Reserve and worked with the infrastructure of it, how the Federal Reserve ran. So he understands that. But the key things that make him right for the current moment are these things. Number one, he does not believe, and I know this is kind of wonky, but he does not believe that economic growth per se causes inflation. The current Fed board believes that if the economy is expanding, therefore inflation will expand. That's not necessarily true. It can be true when government spending is causing this expansion because too much spending causes inflation. So when you have government spending propping up the economy, that can lead to inflation, which is what Powell allowed. Powell, however, thinks that all growth causes that. That's not true. Private sector growth that increases the amount of supply of goods and services brings down prices because when the supply of items goes up, naturally the prices come down because there's more goods. The reason why Rolls Royces don't sell as much as Hondas is because there's many more Hondas on the market, so they charge lower prices than a Bentley. Yes, Bentley has better appointments, but the point is the more goods that are out there, likely to lower the prices. So Warsh is completely opposite on this issue with regard to Powell. Powell believes all growth results in inflation, so he wants to raise interest rates to kill off growth if he thinks it's going too fast. On the other hand, Warsh believes that the right growth can actually lead to lower prices. That's why he's so good. Number two, he believes in worse, this is transparency. He went to the Bank of England and he was hired to look at that and tell them how you can be more transparent because he wants the market to understand what the rules are. The market today doesn't understand the rules of what's happening at the Federal Reserve. It's a mystery why they make their decisions to go up or down. They don't really disclose in full what their calculation model is. Kevin Warsh believes in transparency, and that will be better for the American economy. He also believes that interest rates should be cut at this time. That's not as important as those other two, in my view. I do think the interest rate should be cut. But those two major things is why Kevin Warsh is so important. I want to thank Ex American News for covering us, worldviewtube.com for having us on the show. There are my vitals: Instagram, Facebook. Please join me at Substack, and we'll be right back with Rick Leventhal to talk about the Lemon arrest and more about the media. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome back, everyone, to Politics in Perspective. As you know, one of the stories of this week was the arrest of Don Lemon. So I'm particularly thrilled to have a friend on the show who I think is just an absolute straight shooter, and that is Rick Leventhal. He's on Newsmax. Rick, thanks for joining us. It's perfect timing. But before we get exactly to Don Lemon, people should know a few things about you. You've been in this business, I don't want to say how many years you just said, but a long time. You started in your 20s, and you've seen a lot of changes in the media. And Don Lemon inserting himself is a bit of a change. So please tell us a little bit about your book and how that relates to what you see the change in the media these days.
Well, my book was a chronicle of my 35 years of basic street reporting, but I, covered 10 years of local news, then went to national news with Fox News Channel and became their number one go-to breaking news guy. So I traveled the world covering conflicts, wars, hurricanes, terror attacks, and that was the basis of my book. Just kind of laying all that out. This is what I did for a living for a very long time, chasing catastrophe. And it's a remarkable journey. I had some incredible adventures, and I did learn a lot. And over the course of all those years, yeah, the media landscape did change dramatically. And just as way of background, when I was a local reporter in Miami, Don Lemon worked for one of the competing stations. So I would see him from time to time out on the street. We weren't like close friends, but we knew each other. When I saw him years later, I said, "Hey, how are you?" When he had moved on to, I guess, CNN. And it's a funny story. Actually, one time I was out late night in the Hamptons and in a club with a bunch of my buddies, and I felt someone grab my ass, Tom. And I turned around, and it was Don Lemon. Like
You,
I don't play like that, so I looked at him. I go, "You do that again, I'm gonna punch you in the face." And and he was like, "Oh, sorry, sorry." And then we wound up having drinks with him till pretty late. But that was my like Don Lemon experience. Like I knew him back in the day, and then he grabbed my ass. But what happened in Minneapolis with Don Lemon, if I could just jump forward to that, to me was not journalism. Okay. And when I heard he was arrested for what happened, my initial reaction as a journalist was like, whoa, 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 First Amendment, you can't arrest a reporter. Even though I had already talked about it on my show, I knew the background. What he did was wrong. So, yeah, I had an initial, wait, they arrested him? And I was like, yeah, good. I'm glad they arrested him because it's one thing to be embedded with the military, which I've done many times. It's and even be embedded with protesters. But when you become their mouthpiece, when you take part in what they're doing, which is illegal, you've crossed a line. There are guardrails to our First Amendment freedom of the press, freedom of speech. You have to allow others to enjoy their First Amendment rights. In this case, people inside a church praying, taking part in a Sunday morning service. You can't just barge in and bring your dumb protest into their house of worship and disrupt it and make it about you and no longer about them. And Don Lemon was a big part of it, and he was grandstanding, and he's out front, apparently trying to interview the pastor and telling the pastor, "Get your hands off me," as if the pastor's pushing him out the door. Well, guess what? You have to leave, okay? You're not supposed to be in there. And he knew what they were going to do. He should have known that it was against the law. If he didn't, that's on him. And so just, Tom, excuse me for rambling on, but I'm glad they busted him. I don't know if he's gonna wind up in prison, but what he's charged with does carry up to 10 years behind bars. So I guess we'll just have to watch and wait and see how it plays out.
yeah. So the attorney in me sees, of course, he's a journalist. But what struck me about the videos we saw of him at that moment in time was that the protest is kind of at its height at that moment, and he's right in the face of the guy. And to me, it seems like you talked about being embedded, but there's a fine line between egging on protesters and just taking a picture of them while they're protesting. And
Right, right.
so I think he ratcheted up the temperature in the room as opposed to standing back and maybe afterwards walking up to him and saying, "What was your view of all of that?"
If you want to take the journalism argument to the next logical step, it would be, okay, you're with this group, you're chronicling their protest. Once you reach the doors of the church, there's a line, and that's a line that you shouldn't cross. So let them go inside, stay out, and shoot through the window or through the front door. Or you're inside, once they start protesting and disrupting things, maybe that's the time to back off. But he was not interested in observing the law or the rights of the people who were inside the church. He was more interested in furthering his own agenda. And I can guarantee you, Tom, he is loving every minute of this, loving the attention. Finally, he's relevant again. He was fired from CNN. Elon Musk kicked him off the X platform because he didn't like the slanted questions that I guess Lemon was asking him. And so now he has this podcast, and maybe people only watch, was involved, and he's putting himself out there. But it's, you're going to call yourself a journalist, you should act like one, and I don't think he did.
Speaking of which, MS Now photoshopped the picture of this
Yeah,
Preddy character.
yeah.
I mean, that to me is like unbelievable because, again, the attorney amount comes out with me, and so I've had clients like write on exhibits, and I'm like, you're not allowed to write on an exhibit. That's evidence. Is
They're manipulating the message. They're manipulating the messengers to make them look more friendly and palatable. Oh, he's just a nurse. Well, if you watch the video of what he was doing to that federal agent vehicle, kicking the sides of it, prior to that, spitting in the direction of a federal agent, and then kicking out the rear taillight and begging them for a fight while he's armed. He's carrying a handgun and he's confronting armed agents in the street and encouraging them to take a swing at him. What's he doing? He's not just some calm, peaceful, innocent protester. And then you have Anna Navarro on The View saying, he's a perfect guy. He's the kind of guy I want my daughter to marry. Like, what are you talking about? You don't know him. You don't know his agenda. We don't know how many other times, Tom, he was out there protesting, maybe captured on video the day after that, the day after that. Maybe he was doing it every day. And even if he wasn't, if he only did it the first time and the last time, he was still crossing a line. You don't interfere with law enforcement on the job. They were on the job, and he put himself in between them and their mission. He tried to start a fight with them. He damaged their vehicle. He should have been arrested that first time. I'm surprised he wasn't. But these guys have a job to do, and it's not dealing with anarchist protesters. They're trying to catch criminals who are in this country illegally, and there are lots of them to catch. So what's happening now is you have these paid, I don't know that he was paid, but we know that many of them are being paid. Certainly there are organizers being paid agitators, paid anarchists, paid organizers, creating these situations to, I believe, make the president look bad. They're only doing this in Minneapolis, in part to distract from the billions in fraud was on, because that's where agents are surging, and they want to make them look bad and make the president look bad so they can, in their eyes, hopefully win the midterms. But what this guy did is despicable, and the way the media is portraying him as Mr. Nice Guy who was just trying to help out a woman in need, he was helping her to her feet. That's not what happened, is it? Like, we look at the video now, we're like, that doesn't describe what I just witnessed, that was captured on video. Everyone's got cameras out. And just one other thing, since I'm on a roll here, Tom. The woman who was killed, very unfortunate incident, again, but she should have been home with her kid. She should have been home with her wife. She shouldn't have been driving her vehicle to block federal agents from doing their jobs and then giving them like a sly smile and a sarcastic smile and laughing at him. Meanwhile, her wife is recording the whole thing on her phone and telling her, drive, get out of there. And she drives right at an agent and she gets shot. Now, I ask you, we've seen all these videos. Why haven't we seen the wife's video? Why haven't we seen the footage that she was shooting from 5 feet away of the entire incident, which would probably be the best view and represent exactly what was happening, what they were saying, what they were
yeah.
doing, how they were resisting, how they were refusing to obey the orders given to them by federal law enforcement. Get out of the vehicle. Oh, you're going to put it in reverse and then put it in forward when they told you to get out? What do you think is going to happen when you disobey orders from law enforcement? It's basic stuff. You don't disobey, because then you get arrested or worse. You obey orders. They refused. They're breaking the law. And it's happening every day up there. And if the local cops would do their job like they do in non-sanctuary cities and keep protesters back, keep them away from the federal agents, or arrest them if they cross a line, then the agents can do the job they're hired to do and that we all pay them to do, which is to catch illegal criminals in this country and deport them, just like we did under President Obama when 5.2 million were kicked out of the country. And Barack Obama put a medal on Tom Homan, who was working for him at the time, for deporting almost 1 million illegals in 1 year. And now he's doing the same thing for Trump, and he's a Nazi, he's Gestapo, he's the devil. Like, it's all manipulated by the media, which has become a very fractured and unreliable source for news in many cases.
Okay, so exactly. Heading back to Navarro, she clearly makes these comments, not probably seeing the second video, right? But how does that station keep? What credibility does she have? So she has no idea what this guy is like. I mean, there's stories, I haven't been able to confirm them, about the wife saying that he beat her, but what guy? This is a star for them. They pay her a lot of money. Does she have
Yeah.
any credibility at all? And why do these stations, for those of us right of center who don't have your experience, how is it possible that a network could allow a doofus like that to continue to work for them?
Well, the network is pursuing an agenda, and so is that program. The program is 99.9% liberal. Their guests are 99.9% liberal. And the message that they want to deliver to their audience, which is apparently the bulk of liberal, whenever they say something ridiculous, like, I want my daughter to marry that guy, everyone's like, yay, yay. ICE is bad, yay. They're pursuing an agenda, and the reason why she can get away with it is because that's what the bosses want them to talk about, and that's what the bosses want them to say. I mean, it's just like Jimmy Kimmel. Like, what a joke. Same network. When you go from morning to night, and now at night on the late night show, here's Jimmy Kimmel crying about Alex Preddy, crying that he was, as if a friend who died out there. He doesn't know Alex Preddy. He doesn't care about Alex Preddy. He's a showboat who's trying to make it about him, how he's so broken up about this. He didn't cry about Charlie Kirk. He made a nasty joke about Charlie Kirk. He didn't cry about all those women who were raped and murdered by illegals allowed in under the Biden administration. He wasn't crying up there for those women who were brutalized. It could have been his sister, his wife, his mom, his daughter. He's a hypocrite, just like so many others. And it's hard to watch, and I won't watch.
Okay, so you reported on something that was a pretty big moment in American history, and I want you to talk about your experience. You were interviewing someone when the second tower fell, were you not? And you were in New York
Yeah,
City.
I was living in New York City, working for Fox News Channel at the time, and um, I mean, I don't know how deep you want me to go. It was
Well,
an
I want you to
insane day.
focus on the experience you had and what the nation was like versus what the media does today.
Yeah,
But say
well,
whatever you want.
as a whole, it was the worst experience, the most challenging experience of my career. But I was there at the base of the towers when they were both on fire before they fell. I was 2 blocks north at the final police tape line, and a female officer threatened to arrest me if I tried to go any further because I'd already crossed a couple lines to get where I was. Found our satellite truck and was at the truck on camera with a mic in my hand when the first tower fell. And we had to run from the dust cloud. Same thing happened in the second tower. And each time we went back out there to interview people coming out of the dust and the cloud who had just gone through the worst experiences of their lives. And it was a very unsettling time. Obviously, we had lost cell service. We had no information. We were just going by what we're hearing on the street. And that was a day that changed America, and it certainly changed my career. I went to Afghanistan 2 months later. Was with the first group of journalists to be embedded with Marines in Afghanistan in November and December of that year, 2001, and then went back in 2003 with the Marines for the invasion of Iraq. Went to Afghanistan and Iraq several times after that, and went to Libya too. And I don't know where I'm going with this, except that that was a time when the nation came together, and I think that's where you were going with your question. The nation pulled together. We are united as Americans, and we'll stand together to face our enemies as one. And that feeling has obviously dissipated tremendously. And there are still many patriotic Americans, but unfortunately, we're all very split on political lines in ways that you and I, we grew up where it was okay to have a difference of opinion, and you weren't called names necessarily. You weren't ostracized. You weren't either with us or against us just because you were a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. But now it's so fractured, and people are so angry with each other for feeling the opposite way. And for me, I guess I'm one of those people, because I don't understand how someone can be so anti-ICE when they had no problem with ICE with a different president in the White House. So if you're going to come at me and say, "Oh, ICE, they're the worst people on earth," I'm going to tell you you're wrong. They're patriotic Americans who were hired to do this job. Same job they've been doing for more than 20 years. So sorry, but they've turned it into politics, and it's not.
So then, describe for a little bit for us your transition. You now host a show, and so you're you've interviewed me, full disclosure, a couple of times. How's that different from you? And how do you view the media now that you're sitting behind the desk and you're the host?
Well, for the first time in my career, I'm able to share my opinion freely. I was always fair and balanced. I was at Fox News Channel for 24 years, and even though it was a conservative leaning network, I was a general news correspondent. I was a senior correspondent, but I covered news, so I wasn't doing a lot of politics. And even if I did, my boss wanted to make sure that I presented both sides of the story, or all three sides of the story, to not give it a Republican slant or a conservative slant. A lot of the stories we told at Fox were conservative based stories, because those stories were not being covered by the rest of the networks. But I was very careful to present the facts. And if my opinion seeped in here or there once in a while, okay, yeah, I probably did. But I prided myself on being pretty straightforward and down the middle with my reporting. But of course, I had personal feelings, and it was frustrating not to be able to share them all the time. And now I have the freedom to say whatever I want every night, and I do. And I write my own monologues. They can be 3 minutes, they could be 8 minutes. I haven't written tonight's yet, but I'll just sit down and go. It's like writing a term paper every day. But I'm writing about things that I'm passionate about, and I do enjoy sharing my opinion. And it is sort of a mix now, my show, of news and opinion. And I will freely inject my opinion into interviews, for example. But that's it's what the network wants. It's what the job calls for. Since I'm on at 7 p.m. Eastern, I'm now in like early prime, and that's where the opinion shows have always been. That's where they live on Fox, and that's where they live on Newsmax. And um, I, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite that I talk about the fractured media and then I'm bringing my own opinion on my show. But again, that's just the way. That's the way it is now. That's the way the media has gone now. And I think it's pretty clear when I'm giving opinion and when I'm presenting facts. And I guess it's almost like point NBC side of the story. And then if you watch us, hopefully you'll get both sides of the story, but you'll also get it from a more conservative viewpoint. And that's what I do, and I love doing it. My show's doing really well on Newsmax too. We're number one or number two pretty much every night, and I'm just really enjoying the ride. And I don't have to go to the office. I do go to the office a couple weeks a year in New York and down in Florida, but I have a studio upstairs, and we have a house in Palm Desert, and I have a studio there too. So wherever I am at home, I just turn on the lights and sit down and turn on the prompter, write my scripts, and wait for the green light to go on.
All right, you're also in the shadow of Los Angeles, and I recently was on your cast as well, and I talked about the one-party state that is media that was California for so very long, that hid a lot of these things. So, LA, I mean, Karen Bass shouldn't be in charge of a lemonade stand. I know some of the people up there. So what side of the story can you give us about the frustration and how
Yeah.
ludicrous it is that they haven't even hired extra people to help them?
Well, I'm an East Coast guy. I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, right outside D.C. My parents still live in the house I grew up in. Then I moved. I worked in South Carolina, Florida. I did work in Chicago, and I worked in New York City for the last 25 years before I moved to California. I've only been here 5 or 6 years now, long enough to see how the state's run, how poorly it's run, and primarily, Los Angeles, how poorly that city is run. And I have freely criticized Karen Bass on my show and Gavin Newsom for the poor, poor job they've done running the city and the state. And it is basically a one-party state. But there's one of the leading candidates for governor to replace Newsom, who I'm friendly with and who I would support. I think he's terrific. I've interviewed other gubernatorial candidates on my show, and there's always a chance that the state would elect a Republican, but the odds are stacked. The cards are stacked against them. It's frustrating in that regard. It is a beautiful state that's being run into the ground, and it's disappointing to see. I know you have a lot more history here than I do. I do love living here and being in Orange County. I'm down in Huntington Beach, and I was in Newport Beach for years before that. And just being down here, it's a bubble. We're in the Florida of California. So I'm well distanced from LA. I hate going to LA. I do once a month or so, but it's like, okay, I'll go visit, but I won't live there.
Yeah, California is frustrating because it should be the richest place on earth, but
Yeah.
It's run by this one party state. Rick, I especially appreciate you coming in on short notice for the Don Lemon story, because I think it's an important story, the way the media has crossed over the line. You remember Pat Caddell said that the media was the enemy, the worst enemy of the Republic at one point, and he was a Democrat pollster for Carter. And it's bad news. But that's all the time we got, folks, on Politics in Perspective with Rick. We'll be right back. Hey, Tom Del Carl, welcome back to Politics in Perspective. I hope you enjoyed that segment. Let's do our political roundup for this week. My own, I want to add it in a couple more thoughts on Don Lemon being arrested. There's the legality of it, of course. Him joining in essentially at the moment of a protest adds to the insanity of it all. But it's the greater issue of the media, which we just discussed. We can't live in an environment where part of the media is doing what the left does. I mean, the way they fixed Preddy's picture on MS Now and all of that. We live in a divided media. My book's The Divided Era, and it's pretty bad where they're getting to. But we've talked enough about that already. Let's talk at some length about Walz, Tim Walz, calling it quits. Now, many a politician has sat down and said, I'm never running again. Richard Nixon said that. And then he became president of the United States about 6.5 years later. After saying that, maybe it was 7. Look up Checkers' speech. His dog Checkers was there when he was speaking. But the Tim Walz thing could be real. And the reason why it could be real is because the fraud related to Tim Walz and what they were doing, and also what Democrats are doing in Minnesota with regard to these protests. The fact that they have elected officials on signal chats in that group is very serious. There's no question that fraud occurred in this case. People ask me all the time, well, is Tim Walz going to go to jail? It's not necessarily a crime for an official to turn a blind eye to fraud. My God, that probably happens all the time in America, like it or not. But if they can tie knowledge to either receiving something back, which is an assurance of votes, or contributions, that's when it starts to get into an area where that quite possibly could be a crime. The fact that Tim Walz says, I'm done, either relates to the fact that he's having trouble at home with his wife, which has been in the news, maybe fake news or not news, but that's a possibility. But it's also probably a recognition of what deep water he is in, which brings us all the way back to California. Of course, Gavin Newsom is running for president. He's probably going to announce in December. I've said he would. But how deep is the fraud in California? It's pretty wildly deep. Many years ago, like 20 years ago, there was a study or more in San Diego County, which showed that 25% of the people receiving welfare in that county weren't eligible. They just didn't find out when they were handing it out whether they were truly eligible. They didn't care. They just wanted to give it out and buy votes. Well, you do the math. 25% is a huge amount when you put it on the $375 billion California budget. Not that 25% of all of that is fraud. Who knows? We'll have to see. But there are programs, many of them, well, that will prove to be the case. Remember, during COVID, they had all sorts of money being given out that went to people who weren't eligible for those programs. So Gavin Newsom has his own fraud problems, and it could be very, very significant enough to where he can't run for president this time around. I say this time around because people make comebacks, and what Americans forgive people for doing is pretty unbelievable. And so we can't know for sure. So fraud claims the victim of Tim Walz. How many other Democrat politicians in Democrat states will fraud pull them down and keep them from running? It may well be that 6 months from now, the front runner for the Democrats in the polling will be back to Kamala and maybe even Shapiro, and Newsom will have fallen down because of all the fraud. We're going to have to see exactly. But if I'm Gavin Newsom, I'd spend less of my time attacking Trump and at least allocate some of my time to figuring out how exposed I am with all these problems. With that, let's switch our weekly update with respect to Iran. You might ask why I think this remains such a big story. The reality is, if the Iranian regime falls, not only will it be great for the Iranian people, but if it tilts to the West, it will change geopolitics for generations. It will reduce the influence of China and Russia in the Middle East, which means the temperature falls and the Middle East will be more peaceful. And since Iran currently is has been the largest state sponsor of terror, and they want to remain in that role, if that can be taken off the map, it will be unbelievable. But nothing is assured. President Trump said several weeks ago he would do something if they crossed a red line, if you will. After taking Maduro out, we have moved assets from the Caribbean to the Middle East, and now we're on the doorstep, and the question is what happened next? So let's first get an update from our producer, Annie Cyrus, a former political or religious prisoner of the current regime in Iran. Annie, thanks for joining us again. Why don't you give us an update on what you've learned in the last 48 hours?
Of course. So the quick update is I'm glad you said it the way you said it. I agree. What happens in Iran today, it's not just about Iran, but unfortunately many red lines have been crossed and no response yet, including over 43,000 dead, 50 of them kids. And when I say kid, like literally school kids. We still have over 8,000 injured just with basically going blind, meaning they're shooting them in the eye directly. We have more than 30 nurses who were arrested for treating the injured. So we need to look at this as two different subjects. The humanitarian crisis that is going completely unnoticed. And when I say unnoticed, Tom, you know what was happening in Ukraine. The non-stop report on how many were killed, on how many bombs were dropped, and then we have the Gaza situation. You barely see these reports coming out of, especially mainstream media. The second part is the policies and politics. I said from day one that I understand where President Trump stands is a very tough position. We have allies such as Qatar and Saudi Arabia. We can't just go against their wishes and topple this regime. He needs to calculate too many moves. With that being said, I think even as of right now, we're still just flexing muscle. There's no strike planned. There's no time for it. As you know, on Thursday, President Trump even put out a post on his Truth Social saying, I am giving you a chance. Come to the table and make a deal. He's still trying to figure this out through diplomacy rather than an actual strike. But at the same time, we know President Trump is very unpredictable. Nobody can say for sure what's coming, but I hope something's coming because I don't want to come back next week on your show and say numbers are up to 110, 150,000 dead. But if that's what it takes, as many good leaders have always said, revolutions are worse than wars, and there's always casualty.
Yeah, absolutely. People need to remember there were two American civil wars. The one that broke us from England because the fight was among American colonists in many respects, or battles where there were no British troops at all. And of course, the Civil War with over 700,000 deaths was Americans against Americans. What will happen in Iran if it truly gets to that level? We don't know.
Yes, Trump but if I could just put a note, this is a message to our fellow Americans. The Civil War that you just talked about were Americans against Americans, however, both sides armed. The Civil War in Iran is a regime that is fully armed and equipped with military tools, and the civilians with nothing except, well, their bravery. That's where this is not a fair battlefield. Hold on to your Second Amendment, people.
Is it against the law to own a gun if you're in Iran?
Absolutely, not just against the law, but it is punishable. Could be 15 to 20 years prison, or depending on what kind of weapon you have, it could be execution.
And this is a perfect example, because the reason why that law exists in that state as opposed to some other, in that country as opposed to some others, is because they don't want, they're dictators, and they don't want a citizen militia to be able to arise because they would fight back. Okay, so I've heard that one option is for Trump to take out sort of the command and control centers of the Iranian guards that are doing a lot of this. What's your take on that?
That would be the best option, yes. If President Trump would order a strike on only IRGC buildings, that would literally resolve all the problems. Some have been asking, should we go after Khamenei, the supreme leader? No, people of Iran will take care of him. Don't worry about him. We don't even need to bother. All we need to do is take out the headquarters of IRGC, where all of their planning, communication, and weapons are stored. And there are 5 of them. We could go farther and take out the 12, but there are 5 major buildings that if we take them out, this problem is completely solved.
All right, let's leave it with that for this moment, and we'll get another report, of course, from you next week.
Before I go, can I add one last note, Tom? Again, this is a message to my fellow Americans. Separate the humanitarian crisis from the politics. What I'm trying to say is, if you're discouraged, if you're out of patience for President Trump to make an action, any of that, that does not mean you should give up on the Iranian people who are still on the streets fighting. Keep them in your prayers, be their voice. Don't let our discouraged moment discourage them from their end goal.
Amen to that. Okay, my last comment, we're going to start a new little part of the show, which is put politics in perspective, but history in perspective. As you know, I wrote the book, The Lessons of the American Civilization. So if we can put up the graphic here and talk about this, because the Democrats are pushing socialism. Real socialism requires uniformity. And what I mean by that is everybody has to be treated the same. You hear that among Democrats. Everyone should be, there shouldn't be people too rich. Everybody should have the same level of materiality. Well, uniformity requires conformity. What I mean by that is you have to conform to these demands to be uniform. And conformity requires obedience. What do I mean by that? Well, you have to become obedient to these demands. You don't get to act out. The Democrats on the way act out, but once they're in, or socialists on the way act out, but once socialism is found in history as taking control, you have to be obedient. And finally, obedience requires masters. Someone has to do the enforcing on you being uniform, on you requiring conformity, on you and your obedience. It is the total loss of freedom eventually, every time and everywhere in history, when it's involved with a very large government and large groups of people. So that's our Lessons of this American Civilization moment. I want to thank you again. Please join me on Substack. Go ahead and buy the books, The Divided Era, and Lessons of the American Civilization at tomdell.com. And we'll see you next week on Politics in Perspective.